Think of how many movies you own. Count your downloads, your DVDs, and even your VHS if you're old enough. Are you done? Think of how many films you've seen, no matter where you saw them, be it cinema, lounge room, or floating on a pontoon in a pool. The number, I imagine, is reasonably high. In America, at least, the average person has a DVD collection of only around 15 films. However, with the advent of services such as Netflix, this data is somewhat meaningless. According to a study Netflix did of its subscriber base, the average user watches 3 films a week. That's 156 a year. If we assume 60 years of viewing time, this brings the total number of features you will likely witness in your life up to over 9,000. Although I feel that this is something of an overestimation, it still pales in comparison to the number of films that have been released. Whilst there's no statistic available for the number of professionally released films that exist, IMDb shows somewhere in the vicinity of 2 million, and it is certainly not a complete list. And that isn't even counting plays, stage musicals, and the like. If you, like me, follow a number of the film, television, video game, and other critics that inhabit YouTube, Blip, That Guy with the Glasses, and so forth, you may have noticed that more and more frequently people are complaining that there is a lack of original content being released. This is most evident when one looks at 2013, ostensibly the year of the sequel. Although the number of sequels released as major Hollywood pictures over the past year, 32 by my count, may seem quite small in comparison to the number of major Hollywood releases that occurred, it's still a record-setting number. In no year previous have more existing IPs been resold to the public. But then, it makes sense for this to have happened, as there is provably less risk for creators to return to something with known popularity, rather than putting their time, effort, and money into something untested with audiences. Audiences, it seems, have made the rise of the sequel occur subconsciously, as their wallets have shown they prefer stories about popular characters and settings. Another trend in filmmaking tied to the fact that statisticians have convinced Hollywood that the status quo is the way to go is the prevalence of retellings or reworkings of older stories. Most often it is blatantly obvious when a filmmaker has chosen to make the basis of their works the plot of a pre-existing story. A Cinderella story, for example, is named obviously enough so that one realises it is the retelling of the European folktale Cinderella. Whilst the name is slightly less obvious, the subject matter of Ever After is clearly the same. Everyone knows now, as well, that both 10 Things I Hate About You and The Lion King are Shakespearean in origin, based on The Taming of the Shrew and Hamlet, respectively. But it may be less obvious that The Truth About Cats and Dogs is a retelling of Cyrano de Bergerac. And did you know that O Brother Where Art Thou is actually Homer's Odyssey? Although taking the works of another and changing things just enough to create a new piece for them may seem lazy to some, it is actually a rather interesting creative exercise. Not all people would react to the same stimuli in the same way. If we took this set of characters, or this premise, and based it in another time or in another locale, what would happen? Retellings also allow us to modernise stories, keeping their themes and messages relevant for audiences throughout the generations. All of this has been leading me to my final point for this week. There are only so many basic plots that exist, even within the realms of science fiction, fantasy, or alternate history, where anything conceivable can be brought to life. There are only so many basic formulations that can occur. Think about how many times you've said, "Movie X is just basically movie Y, but with change Z." It isn't the fault of the storyteller that this is happening. Movies X and Y are likely the same stories as thousands of other films, video games, stage productions, novels, and so on. It's just that we are so saturated in media now that more and more people are starting to notice. The issue, though, is the question of just how many base stories there are, and this is a point upon which few literary scholars can agree. Georges Polti, for instance, posited that there were 36 separate ideas for story, and be thankful that I shan't list them for you now. Ronald Tobias in 1993 suggested that there may only be 20 truly unique ideas. Not convinced that's accurate? Jessamine West feels that all stories can be broken down into human versus nature, human versus human, human versus environment, humans versus machine or technology, humans versus the supernatural, humans versus self, and humans versus God and religion. That's 7 for those of you counting along. One man, however, decided that even this was too many. Although, to be fair, he did decide this before several of these lists were created. In 1959, William Foster Harris argued that there were only 3 types of stories: the happy ending, the unhappy ending, and a third type he called the literary plot, where the critical event of a story takes place at the beginning, and everything after this is simply an inevitability, almost tragic in how it plays out. I don't know about you, but I feel that may be a bridge too far.